All right, I'll give you a quick little intro. I guess hit it, Heather. Good morning, everybody. This is Scott Russell from Western Michigan University. I'm the secretary of our famous little group here. Thanks, everyone, for coming and watching our webinar, Include Accessibility in Your Workflow, that being brought to you by the Web and User Experience Interest Group as part of MiALA. Our chair, Dennis Layton, sends her regrets. She's homesick today, else she'd be here on the call with us. I'm also joined by Angela Brecka, our vice chair. So you have your little leadership team here. We're really pleased to introduce to you John Early today. John's going to be leading this webinar. He's a user interface design engineer at the University of Michigan Library. His focus is on front-end development, web accessibility, design systems, and user experience. Before coming to Michigan, John worked at Skokie Public Library as a web developer, and prior to that, he worked as an adjunct web developer at Grand Valley State University Libraries. Before he gets started, I'll just make a quick plug. This webinar is our second of 4 that we're doing this academic year. 2 more coming up. One is on Friday, February 28th at 10 a.m. called The Value of Involving Student Colleagues in Library UX Work. And then in March, on Wednesday, March 25th at noon, we'll be running a webinar on Google Data Studio. We will be sending out reminders, email reminders and invitations, just like we did for this one. But be watching for those dates, February 28th and March 25th. And with that, we'll hand it over to John.
Hello, everyone. I just want to say thank you to this group and for Denise reaching out to me to kind of make all this possible. I'm excited to talk about accessibility. I care a lot about it. So let's dig in a little bit. So I hope that you can take away from this talk a few ideas and a process so that you can apply accessibility in your work. Kind of right off the beginning, I wanted to list my top resources that I will access frequently in my accessibility work. MiALA has this developer network, and it's my go-to resource for really for most things. And DQ University has a ton of resources on accessibility. They create tooling. There's this tool called Axe that you can install in your browser and evaluate your page for things that can be automated. The Ally project is like an approachable resource for getting started with accessibility. And then Aria has some patterns around common widgets and UIs that can be kind of complicated to implement in an accessible way, and they provide a lot of great documentation on how to make things like drop downs or more modals and things like that, make them accessible. And then there's the web content accessibility guidelines that are also excellent, but they're kind of heavy. But don't be afraid of that. You can kind of dip into them and reference things as your accessibility expertise grows. So who are we designing for? We're designing for people who are diverse, of course. 15% of the population has some kind of disability, according to the World Health Organization's report on people with disabilities. And we don't want to leave people behind in the work that we do. I think that in our roles, contributing to websites, we can make a huge difference and enrich people's lives just by enabling them to use our websites. We help them become more independent and included. So I've been thinking more deeply about accessibility over the past 3 or so years, pretty much on like a daily basis. And I've come to decide that there's these pillars around accessibility that are required for an organization to do well. So I've broken them down into these 6 categories. The first is there needs to be the capability at the organization. That means accessibility knowledge, skill development. There needs to be some sort of body of knowledge around accessibility. And that needs to cut across like content strategy, visual design, interaction design, research, user experience, front-end development. Accessibility is really something that kind of cuts across all disciplines. And for your capabilities should always be being refined and building up. Then resources is you should have someone that will, you should have some support in regards of funding and allocating staff to accessibility. So that might look like adding a new role or carving out time in your responsibilities for accessibility and making that a priority. You also need support from like high-level management. They should understand what accessibility is and aids it in effective ways, such as providing leadership, allocating resources, and having the willingness to champion that change to start involving accessibility in work. As part of teams or committees, what have you, they should have a shared vision of accessibility goals and understand how to meet them. For process, I think your workflows need to account for accessibility, especially in user research. Make sure you're including a representative group when you go out and do your research. That includes people with different disabilities. Your content strategy should account for accessibility, design, and front-end development. If you leave accessibility solely for developers to handle, you're not going to be as successful as you might think. And then lastly, schedule. A project schedule should predict and support accessibility in iterative design and research. This might look like complicated accessibility issues are accounted for and prioritized appropriately. So that means like if your project has a schedule, maybe put the difficult accessibility tasks up front, or just make sure that those making the schedules and decisions account for this. So it's a lot, but I think when all these pillars are strong and support each other, it provides a solid foundation and eliminates resistance to make high quality accessibility work possible and easier for everyone involved. So let's take a look at a website redesign project that is going on right now. It's almost done at the University of Michigan Library, and how we supported these pillars to make a new website that we believe is highly accessible. So our project manager was a champion of accessibility. Early on, when teams were formed, there was a dedicated accessibility team. Our cross-functional workflows embedded accessibility. Everyone asked good questions and brought in the right people at the right times. Like if you don't know about accessibility, don't be afraid to reach out to that group that has the capability. That might be someone outside of your organization to start with, but you need to have someone to kind of mentor and build up that skill set. The timeline was planned for and included accessibility and leadership above the project, signed off and approved of things like an accessibility team and commitments to accessibility goals. So kind of the kickoff started really well. Everyone involved agreed to commit to our accessibility goal, and they adapted their work accordingly. And we didn't know everything we needed to know right up front, but we committed to that common goal. So in this project, we had a design and development workflow. It started off kind of traditional, where there's like this understand, design, build, and release flow. But what we realized is there really needed to be a built-in step between design and build, which we decided to call design in browser. So this means before we commit to building something, we really need to we need the front-end developers and design team to come together and verify that this thing is feasible in browser. And that means, is it accessible? Can it even be implemented? Is it possible? Because we don't want to set the expectation that something can be built before it's been vetted to be possible in browser and accessible. And this was kind of like our opportunity for a cross-functional team to give feedback to one another. Maybe some front-end developers that knew more about accessibility could communicate kind of back up to design, and content needs came back down to front-end developers, and it ended up being a great kind of a crossroads for everyone to learn from each other. And then once we actually wanted to build and release, we were really confident that what we had is the right thing to make. So I pulled an example here where our project manager is reaching out in our accessibility focused chat channel, asking for advice on supporting appropriate staff profile alternative text. So project manager goes, "Hello friends, I'm planning profile pages and wondering about alternative text for profile photos. The current website defaults to unique name photo, which is obviously not great. And the project manager was wanting to get thoughts on a good approach. So our accessibility expert wondered if it would be possible if people could supply their own alternative text to their own profile photo. And as it turns out, that is possible because the project manager in planning is going to be having some upcoming outreach to support getting profiles updated for the new website. And so they both decided that looked like a good opportunity to get together then and come up with a plan during this outreach that was already going to happen to include this accessibility component for getting appropriate alternative text to a staff profile photo. So this is just one example of project manager reaching out during their planning, including accessibility in their process. And I thought it was, and this sort of thing happened quite a bit during this project, and it's a great example. So this is another example here where, as the visual designer was coming up with mockups, the accessibility team asked them to consider what the tab order would be on the page. So someone who is a keyboard-only user, we want to make sure we're designing a good experience for them. And it's also good for anybody who wants to use their keyboard or tab through. So it's just kind of like opening our ideas of what to design for. And so we built these kind of stickers that you would drop on to tab 1, tab 2, and so on, and then arrows to show the flow from one to the next. And so that was a good exercise. And also during design, we wanted to make sure the heading structure was semantic and well structured. So we asked the content design teams to identify heading levels. So on the right, you'll see H2 and H3. And so that helps designers think about how do these translate to browser. And it made the developers make less assumptions about heading levels and tab order and document structure. So that's my slides, but I wanted to go into an actual live demo of the new website. So I'm going to have quite a bit of time, I think, at the end, based on how long I think this will go. So if you have any questions, definitely write them down as you think of them, and we'll discuss at the end.
And this is Scooter just jumping in for a second. If you want, as you think of questions, if you just want to put them in the group chat, Angela and I will watch that, and we can make sure that that John sees them at the end.
Yeah, thank you. So if you can go to this URL too if you want. I'm going to switch over to it. So how can you test for accessibility? You already have one of the most powerful tools. It's your keyboard. Many assistive device users, by people with disabilities, rely on keyboard access. So my personal go-to technique when making a website is to ensure everything is accessible by keyboard. So consider just like putting your mouse away when you're evaluating a site. So if I step into the site, I have a little highlighter in the bottom left to show what keys I'm pressing. So you can get an idea of what's happening here. So I'm tabbing forward, tabbing back. And right off the bat, you see these skip links at the top. A pretty traditional one is the skip to main content, which lets keyboard users jump beyond all the header links and information so that they can just get to what they're there for. What they're likely there for is to read the content that's lower down in the page. But through our designs, we decided to also put skip links to our chat and a site map, because through our research, we found that users sometimes just wanted complete mapping of our site, especially screen reader users, because they want to control F or get a bigger picture of what this site information architecture is like. So a common problem with websites for keyboard users is that they can't tell where their focus is. So as you can see, there's this outline around these skip links, and that's there intentionally. So it's like how you can see your cursor when you're moving around. Like imagine someone taking that away and asking you to use your site with a mouse. So as we tab into here, we have this top thin bar that we call the universal header. And so as you can see, I'm focused on this Explore button. If I hit enter, it opens up links to other websites that we have that we think the users might be interested in. So that's like going to our search, our catalog, our research guides, and so on. And so as I opened it and I tab, I go right into it, and I go to all these focusable things. But what's also key, since this is an overlay on the site, so we want to make sure people can get out of this very easily. So if I hit escape, it closes and puts the focus back near where the focus was before the modal or the drop down was closed. You can also just enter to open and close it. So we've made it about 40 pixels down in the site so far, but you can already see how everything has been carefully considered for accessibility. We have our header, which includes like our main navigation into the site. So these are, they look like links, but they're actually buttons. So if you enter on one, we get this large drop down that reveals different sections of our site. And this behaves pretty similar to the Explore dropdown, where you click on a button and it expands, shows more. You can tap around into it, go back, close it again. And the focus style is also very prominent. And also the active style of this being open is prominent. And we have this very contrasty left bar, so that if you were not someone with low vision and couldn't perceive this really light teal, you could perhaps perceive this contrasty border. You can close that, move along. And now we're into our site search. So I'm interested in design lab workshop. I want to check out our 3D printers and different neat things. So as you can see, as I was typing, results are appearing below. I also provide brief instructions on how to use this with your keyboard. So if I arrow down, again, you see this like really strong focus style, the left border. Highlighted terms are bolded, so they also have that background, which is pretty light contrast, but it's useful for people with good vision. But that bold is a strong enough difference than just a plain normal weight. So let's go to this page. So I just hit enter on that result. And so with this website, we are using client-side routing. So what that means is instead of asking the server to give the user a new page, it's just getting the data to make a new page and then routes in browser to this new page. So that ends up being, the benefit of that is it's extremely fast for the user, but the downside is assistive technologies no longer know that you're going to a new page. So we had to rebuild that queue for users to know that they landed on a new page. And the technique we chose to do that is by setting the focus on the H1 for the page, which we think is just pretty descriptive of the location. So here, workshop is the H1, and it has this left border again that we saw in the nav and in search results. We're carrying that over as like our visual cue. And so if I were to tab forward, I'm proceeding on from that header. And we tested this with users who use screen readers and different technologies, and this ended up being a good approach for them. They could recognize where they landed, and it was better than what we had before. So as I maybe go to different pages, you can see how it's focused there. Here it's again focused. Because headings are extremely important. That's how most users of screen reader users use to get around. Like think of it as a table of contents. Like you need that to scan the page and help you find where the content that you're most interested in. All right, so that's a couple examples of how we've made interactions and navigation on this site accessible. But what if I just want like an automated tool to help me out? Let's see if we can catch anything that I'm not aware of. So there's this thing called Axe. I have it. It was one of the bullets in my list of resources at the top of the talk, but it's a browser tool. I've installed it. I am accessing it here, and if you click Analyze, it'll run through your page and see if it can find any errors. So I have two here. This is saying the library copyright policy is having an issue, and I believe that's this part here. And sometimes tools like this just don't know. Like perhaps they just can't tell if something's accessible. But since this white on this dark is very contrasty, it's not an issue. It just must be having a trouble figuring that out. And then this issue is about this chat element being outside a HTML region. And a fix for that could be to move this. See, and this is where we thought chat is kind of tricky. So we've made it a skip link, right? Because we find it kind of odd as it's not in the document. Like, how would you know how to tab to it? I guess you could assume it's at the bottom, but since it's fixed to your viewport, we think it's kind of it could be confusing of how to access it. So that's why we have a skip link to get to it quickly. But tools want these accessibility tools want you to put all content in regions, because just as users can navigate and scan pages by headings, they can also scan by regions. So here we have a nav around the breadcrumb, and we call it breadcrumb. So someone could pull up a list of all regions, and they could see that there's this navigation element that's called breadcrumb, and that would help them get here. Because this doesn't necessarily have a header to get to it, but they could find it by semantic markup and an appropriate label. So that's my demo of our site. And a couple examples, just to see if those would perhaps spark some ideas. But my takeaway is like, include accessibility in your workflow. Just find ways, pause every day when you're doing something, and just ask how you can include accessibility. I am a front-end developer and accessibility specialist, and recently changed titles, but so I think about it in a lot of my perspective. But just like on this project, the project manager was planning some strategy around profile photos, found ways to incorporate accessibility and reach out to expertise, and design found ways to come up with ways to think about tabbing and heading structure, because users who rely on those things are also our users, and it's important to consider everyone. So that's my talk. Thank you. Let's see if we have any questions.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, John. What questions does anybody have? You can either gracefully unmute yourself or drop them into the group chat and we'll pass them on. John, I had a simple question. When you were demonstrating those highlights around the menu items as you were tabbing through, I assume those are just on-focus CSS styles. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. I didn't know if there was any deeper magic than that. It seemed straightforward.
Yeah, like these here.
All right. So we got a couple of questions come in. Suzanne asks, what type of info do you include in the alt text for profiles?
So that's what's interesting. I think that plan is still in the future, but I would assume it would be like, so think of your public profile. What do you want people to know about you? And then why do you add an image? So when you want to think about alt text, you want to think about the context of the content. And so asking someone to describe an alternative to their profile picture gives them an opportunity to give an alternative to the picture. So that might be like, I guess I can't really come up with an example off the top of my head, but does that?
You know, I would think the question that I would have that'd be related to that is if you're imagining putting user profiles online, you're probably putting it next to text that says Scott Russell, Director of IT Services, works in the IT Services group, maybe specializes in X, Y, and Z. How much of that is would you repeat in alt text? Because I could imagine one argument that says, well, it's Scott Russell in a red sweater, but that's maybe not useful to the purpose of that page. How much of that text would you replicate outside of the regular flow of the page? How much of that would you bring into the alt tag? Is there an art to that or a science to that?
Yeah, and sometimes I've noticed with alt text, people think they must add something, but if you don't think it's useful, it's totally appropriate to just put alt equals empty quotes, or to give that image like role presentation, to just say it's like purely presentation, decorative. But if there's, if you're a certain individual that wants to communicate something with your appearance and you want that to come through in your profile, then that would be an appropriate spot for that.
And to expand a little bit further on that, then, we're getting some advice here at WMU to be much more conversational in our alt tags. Where many years ago I might have put a 3-word alt tag or something, we're being told, Angela, is it like 20 or 25 words is not inappropriate, that you could be a little more chatty. Do you have any sort of rule of thumb about that for your own alt tags?
Yeah, alt tags are hard. I'll say that. I think it really comes back to your content strategy and what you're trying to communicate in the page. And if you were to not have the image and the text was there, like you still get the same. Are you leaving that page with the same kind of information that you hoped the person would leave with? I don't write too much alt text, but I'm near people who do, so I'm trying to channel them a little bit.
Sure.
Hey,
Sure.
Scooter, can you hear me?
Yes.
Can I chime in here?
Absolutely.
Okay. I put a link in the chat, actually, a really good resource that we use for alt text. It's from Web AIM. Excuse me. And I guess just kind of what was said already, that well, yes, you have sighted users. Also, sometimes there's poor internet connection, so you might, that if that picture doesn't show up, yeah, I see it now, the link I sent. But when that picture doesn't show up, yeah, what is critical to know? So the red sweater, not critical. Your name, if it's not stated elsewhere, that would be critical. But if your name is like, if you have a heading that says, you know, your name, then you wouldn't repeat it there in the image. So what's critical?
Yeah, alt text is not the time to repeat content that's like really adjacent to the image. You know, it's you added it to the page for a reason. So finding if yeah, like it should be there for a purpose, and if it's only supplemental to the content around it, then I think just adding alt text, not empty quotes, is fine. But that's not the case for everything, of course.
Great. So Brian started another question in the chat. He asks, for people without a lot of staff or time, what are must-have accessibility tips you give? So how to help somebody on limited resources prioritize their accessibility efforts?
Yeah, having your pages be semantic, good HTML. Try using your site with your keyboard, because oftentimes if you can get around with a keyboard, that means it's coded well and assistive technology can hook into it. So that's kind of a semantic things, but then you can get things like Axe tools to run tests for you on pages, and it could pick up a lot of contrast issues that sometimes happen, or you know, things you don't have to learn a bunch about. They can just check for you and show you what to do next.
Great. And Brian also asks if you have some estimate of the number of people who are actually using a screen reader to hit your site, or the percentage. I mean, how big is the target that we're aiming for?
Specifically screen reader users, I'm not sure, but I usually think of this number when 15% in terms of population.
Mm-hmm.
But for perhaps privacy reasons or whatever, you know, we don't know. But I think it's safe to assume about 15% of your users have some sort of disability. And there's a really good screen reader survey by WebAIM, I think. That might bring some insight to that. I'll share it. Yeah, I really enjoy reading these each year. It's a survey for screen reader users, and you get some insight on how what they prefer and how they navigate, things like that.
Great. We've got a little bit more time here. Does anybody else have any other questions for John? I too have found that WebAIM survey to be really interesting. We looked at it a while back because Angela here led a project to try to make our site more accessible. And we were looking, our particular interest was to find sort of screen reader of choice. So it's interesting to see, to look back over those multiple years of surveys and see the trends in terms of which screen readers are more popular. But there is a lot of really good information in those.
Yeah, like we've provided landmarks that we think are good, but I look at a survey like this and it's like, wow, nobody actually cares about those. Maybe it's because most of them are implemented poorly, so we're trying to think of it like, well, if we do it right on the site, maybe people will trust them. But headings clearly make a lot of sense. Using find is a direct reason why we have a big sitemap page, so that if someone wants to use find, they can just hop over to the sitemap and find a page. So yeah,
is find the search box?
I assume that's like your browser find where you control.
Oh, the control F. Okay. Yeah.
So. I think I lost my.
And John, I wonder if you would agree with us. Hearing you talk about using semantic HTML and doing a few other things, I'm reminded of a sort of a mantra that I stand by, which is just good design. If we just think about designing things well in the first place, that we're going to hit some of these accessibility marks to begin with. So I remind myself that I'm not going necessarily out of my way, that it's this whole other set of baggage to include accessibility, but sometimes the first step down that road are just doing it right in the first place. Would you agree with that, or is that a bit of an oversimplification? Or
no, that resonates with me. That makes sense. That makes me think of our new design in browser step in our workflow, where it is, we're trying to make sure the design is right before we just get it out there and build it, so we have a lot of accessibility questions, or making sure things are semantic, the good headings. The topics can really vary, but making sure that good design actually is feasible.
Great. Here are a couple more questions here out of the chat. Krista asks, I've checked the accessibility on our site on a few different tools and have pretty different results for each of them. How do you respond to one tool saying you have no accessibility problems and one tool saying you have several problems?
Yeah. So the thing I've found with tools is I think what the accessibility community says, at best they can catch 50% of accessibility problems. The rest need to be evaluated by a person. And so these tools sometimes try and get a little clever about how they're evaluating, and if they misread something, or if they're more conservative on how they assess the site, you might get less errors. Maybe not the most satisfactory answer, but those tools just kind of their mileage vary. They're there to assist you, but they're not there to give you a clean bill of health. You'll need to evaluate your site.
And Brian also asks, how much training are you actively doing on accessibility for content creators versus more reactively answering questions as they come up? I mean, how baked into your process is it? I guess is what he's getting at.
For this project, it is very much baked in. Um, we're trying to be as proactive as possible, but there was a period of time where we were very much reactive. I think we've learned quite a bit as an organization and have put together the right teams to make this project go so smoothly. But yeah, it's tricky.
This is Brian here, and just to clarify that, I guess what I'm getting at is, how much are you training people to know how to do the accessibility themselves, like content creators, versus saying you need to come and have it passed by the accessibility experts, quote unquote. You know what I mean? Like, how much are you leaving to the content creator to try to figure these out, or training them to look for these things, versus saying, well, we have a team or a person who we just send it to them, they know this.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. So the library here has a digital accessibility team that's been around for about 3 years now, and it was kind of our it was 10% of each member's time, and they're all from different areas of the library, to be like this body of knowledge around accessibility, so that whatever it is, someone's considering purchase for a new web app, or they're just updating their alt text on their profile, whatever it is, like, we had one spot where people could on their own come to and just say, hey, like, I need some advice on how to approach this task in an accessible way. And it would be like a consultation. And then they would learn, and then they would go tell their friends. Then more people would come and ask that team for advice. So we're definitely not like policing accessibility here. It ended up just being more of a building momentum and having a group with support that could at least have some capacity to think about these things at a deeper level and train. And yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, if I could ask a quick follow-up, with that approach, are there like a lot of pages that will have inaccessible content through your site, and what are you doing to kind of gather those, since you're not policing it as much?
Well, at least on this project, the project manager is very much on board with accessibility, and so as contents, there's only one. Well, there's a very small group that's actually writing all the new content for the site, and so it's being vetted by the PM, and they're checking with that group as needed. And then in all of our templates that I was most involved in, like creating, I made sure that like heading structures made sense. Like, this is an H1 and then 2s and so on. And but yeah, there's that question of like remediation. I personally think we should kind of go back and like do the design right the first time. But because it's hard to have, in my opinion, it's much harder to go back and like change things than and like get support for that rather than doing it right at the get-go. I know that's like that's not always realistic, but That's definitely the easier path in my experience. So if there's ever a change in your organization where something new is going to happen, like that's your opportunity to get people to care about accessibility.
Great. Suzanne asks, what about resources from outside vendors on your website? They all have varying levels of adherence to accessibility principles. So do you provide tips to users about the accessibility features of various databases? Or I guess I'd add to that and say, how do you let users know about sort of the unevenness of that um, level of compliance?
Yeah, that's a good one. We don't. uh,
Well, then a quick follow-up then is what sort of work are you doing, or what sort of work might we advocate to do to follow up with those vendors? Because we know we've identified a few here that we're having, we see that unevenness of accessibility support.
yeah,
What can we do to push back against that?
yes, that's a good one. Sometimes we've had people who are procurement come to us and say, "Hey, we want a new library calendar system. Can you help us pick the most successful one?" And the that digital accessibility team that has about 10% of each person's time um, finds they come up with a plan for assessment. They assess the options, and then often, and we have a report of findings, and we'll send that to the vendor in like a respectful way and just say, hey, we found these issues, and they hand it off to their development team. And I think almost every time we've done that, they're super thankful for it and make changes pretty quickly, which is not what I would expect. But I think that they might not have the people looking at their tools the way that we are. And um, uh, so yeah, if you build your expertise around this a little bit and do evaluations and just find a way to share them with the vendor, I think you might have luck that way. But I know there's larger groups that I'm less familiar with, putting pressure on larger systems, like as a coalition of universities or something like that. I have to look it up, but on a small scale, we've had success just sharing our reports with uh, with the service.
Great. Great. We're about 7 minutes from our time. I feel like we're getting close to wrapping up. I'll give Brian the last question. He said it'd be easier to ask on mic, so I'll just turn it over to him.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so you mentioned, I've heard this before, accessibility presentations, that that tools only get, I think you said 15%. I think I've heard that from others too. And really the best way to test for disabilities is to test with actual users. So I totally agree in theory. But I've asked around, I said, how do we market that? How do we get those kind of users? And so I've tried to someone suggested we could work with our disabilities kind of support staff here and at Davenport, and I have, and that I don't know why exactly, but we've gotten almost no response from them. So I'm kind of like, I would love to test with people with actual disabilities. I don't know how to get them.
Yeah, I really support that technique. How we've done it here is we partner with the unit on campus. I think they're called the Office of Students with Disabilities, and we write up an email or some sort of communication message, and they find a channel to send it out, and that's our recruitment technique, and we Sometimes we say, you know, we're interested in anybody. Sometimes we're just saying like, oh, we'd really like to test this out with screen reader users. But you got to be a little careful about like, you know, it's on the individuals to disclose what they want to disclose. But we also have an expert screen reader user on staff. And oftentimes I will go to him to just make sure my stuff isn't horrible before I go to a usability session with people who use like speech to text or a bunch of different things. So you're kind of the path you're describing is basically what I do. But if you have a group on or a unit on your campus that has a registry of people who have, you know, registered for disability, you could just meet with them and find the appropriate way to, like, say, hey, I'm interested in recruiting to test our library sites. How could you help me with recruitment on getting some people testing? See where that takes you.
Hey, Brian, this is Angela. I just wanted to chime in real quick and let you know here at Western Michigan University, we were actually approached by a state of Michigan department, and I apologize, I don't remember what it was off the top of my head, but they actually hired and paid for a person that had low or no vision to come and help us review our entire site. So they were looking for opportunities to partner with Western Michigan University, gave this person the opportunity to, you know, help to make the site better. So I will get that information and I will share it with you. I apologize, I don't remember off the top of my head what it was.
Yeah, that'd be great because we might have to go outside of campus.
Yeah, and it ended up working great. I know, obviously, we're a larger university, but this person, the person that we ended up hiring that helped us review our entire site, has now gone on and is working for our information technology department on campus and helps other students that might need help with screen readers or other technology to navigate campus. So it worked out to be a great partnership, but even if that piece doesn't come to fruition, just the opportunity to sit next to her and watch her move through our site using a screen reader was a real eye-opener for me. And then she did a complete review of it and sent us notes on every page that said, this is working, this isn't working. And some of that stuff we were able to send to our marketing and strategic communications department. They were able to make changes to the site as a whole, because we are part of the Western Michigan University template. So we don't have our own separate, the library doesn't have their own separate site, but we were able to make kind of website-wide changes based on her recommendations.
Thank you. That'd be great if you could send that.
Yes, I will find the information and send it.
Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, and also, like, consider accessibility and diversity in your hiring. Yeah, I just want to drop that out there. Like,
great.
Your site should be diverse as well.
Wonderful. Well, we're approaching the top of the hour, so let me just say thank you again to John Early for this great presentation and for your time with us this morning. And just to give everybody a quick reminder, February 28th at 10 a.m. is our next webinar, The Value of Involving Student Colleagues in Library UX Work. And then March 25th at noon, we're talking about Google Data Studio. So thank you all very much for attending, and thanks for those who offered questions, and we'll see you next time.